Every writer in Steam It liked fiction a lot, and they didn't like poets, 'cause poets did not. But they needed a home for their verbs and their nouns, just an editing place where red inking abounds. Then, Raccoon Rhonda K had a kinky idea, a wonderfully rad pen and inky idea. She'd start up a workshop, critiquing her friends, where the stories and glories and puns never end. And they say her steam power grew 3 times that day, then suggested a talk show should air right away. And the Fictioneers show, now on MFP Waves, is about to be one of your upvoted faves. They talk writing and world building, wangs, balls and stuff. Their broadcasts are pantless, their jokes off the cuff. So join in for mind-melding fiction critique, 10 to 12 UTC time on Tuesday each week. There's only one rule that they deign to enforce: no poems allowed, except for this one, of course.
All right, hello everybody, and welcome to the 4th episode of the Fictioneers Webcast. MSP Waves Radio, Steam It Incorporated, and their respective owners take no responsibility for the opinions or statements made by the talk show hosts or their guests. Statements and show topics are not necessarily the beliefs of the radio station or of Steam It Incorporated. The material on Fictioneers Webcast is provided for educational and informational purposes only. So, welcome everybody to the show. As always, I am Andrei, witness here on PalNet, specifically for the Fiction Workshop, and an aspiring writer. And today we are joined by, let's have it, go on down the line.
This is Carol, also known as the Rhino, book critic. On down the line.
Hi, this is Geek. I write fiction and poetry, and I also write nonfiction, which my field is economics for kids.
And I'm Jason Boo. I'm a mini mod on the Grammar Channel and also an aspiring writer.
Hi, I'm Rhonda. I'm with the Fiction Workshop. Very good to be here tonight.
I'm Jessica, and I'm on Steam It as J.R. Hughes. I'm an aspiring writer as well.
All right, so one thing that I didn't realize about Geek is that she writes economics books for kids. This is a little bit off topic, but I've got to hear about this.
It's awesome, right?
Well, okay, yeah. I wrote a book for my son when he was 8 years old about just the economic realities of life, because he didn't seem to have that knowledge just inherently. I don't know why.
Yeah, I know, right?
Yeah. But so I wrote a book that ended up turning into a school year-long curriculum, because I had a lot of friends who were homeschooling at the time. So now I self-publish it and I sell it to homeschoolers.
That is fantastic. That is probably the most fantastic thing I've heard today. So
good. I'm glad it's improving your day, because I know your shoulder hurts.
It gets better, Andrei. She's an Austrian.
Oh, well, I mean, I would imagine so. Who else would write a children's book for economics aside from an Austrian economist?
So true.
I mean, let's be honest with us. The Keynesians aren't going to do it. They're probably just going to break windows and hope somebody fixes them.
We should probably clarify, though, for people who are listening to this as fiction people, might not understand that does not mean that I'm from Austria.
No, it doesn't. It means that she adheres to the Austrian School of Economics, which getting a little off topic, it adheres to the idea of human action as economics and how incentives affect human action, and human beings are rational actors. So it doesn't study economics as an empirical science, but rather as a logical or a rational exploration of human action. But so that was a little off topic, but I didn't know that, and I'm so glad I know that now, because I'm going to try and get my hands on that, because that is fantastic. So,
you know what? I will send you a copy.
You're awesome. You guys are awesome. Everyone here is awesome, but especially you.
Economics.
Go ahead, Carol.
Economics for an 8-year-old. That's something I might possibly grasp. I don't know. Economics is so far over my head. I'm in awe too, Jason. So I'm glad you took the time to bring this up.
All right. So with that being said, now that my curiosity is satisfied, we have a absolutely fantastic show today. We're going to be going over the winning entry for one of our contests. Actually, Jess, if you could pick up for me, because I'm having trouble figuring out what the heck I'm trying to say. So so if you could please.
Absolutely. Yeah. So we're going to talk a little bit about narrative conflict in general. And that will lead us into the winner, which we can tell you now, it was already in the post. Geek won our first conflict prompt. It was man versus God or fate. And we'll be reading that in a little bit. But first, we're just going to talk a little bit about what narrative conflict is, where that originated, and I was thinking Carol might have some things to say about this as an editor and a reviewer.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
Nobody gave me a warning ahead of time about this.
Well, you've got to
I'll
think
have
on your
to wing
feet.
it.
That's what the Fiction Workshop is all about. We don't wear pants here because we think on our feet.
My feet can't take the weight.
The other thing we're going to be doing is we're going to be opening up for this writing prompt contest, the narrative conflicts that we have going on that Jessica was just talking about. We're going to be opening up for donations to support that contest and support the fiction writing that comes with it. So we'll have that at various intervals throughout the show, but we'll let you know. It won't. I hope it won't interrupt the conversation too much, because I get the feeling this one's going to get going pretty well.
Yeah, all right, Carol, if you're not going to talk, I will talk. You can't even stop me. Okay, so
Oh,
basically,
man.
I have been nerding out for an hour about this whole narrative conflict thing. I mean, I think we all kind of know what it is, but I got a little bit into the history of it. And it was really interesting to me to find that the Greeks were the very first to show such a thing as like a protagonist. And then I got going on like the etymology of the word protagonist. And oh, it was just so much fun. I know really, really nerdy stuff. But
well, I mean that makes sense, because all of the terms that we use to describe the pieces in in narrative fiction are Greek. We use Greek words: archetype, protagonist, antagonist. It's all Greek.
It is all Greek, but I read about it today in English. It did help. So our first narrative conflict prompt was on man versus God, and there are some others. And there's, a ton of disagreement about whether man versus God is even its own thing. The wiki has man against man, man against nature, man against self, man against society. That used to only be 3, I think. It was just man against self, man against society, and man against nature. But they've evolved some. And what I really love about the idea of these prompts is that it's so open. I mean, it gives you kind of a core of what you want to write about, but I mean, you can bring in anything. And actually, our submissions this first week were a great example of that. We had so many varying stories. In fact, Jason Boo, who's here, he had one, and but it was very different from the others. They were all really varied, and that was fantastic. I love seeing that in the Fiction Workshop and on the broader Steemit, people just kind of stretching their legs and finding new ways to be creative.
And you know what? That's the writing prompt itself for this week, which was man versus God or man versus fate, I think really lends itself to that, because there are so many differing interpretations of what that means. Not only literally, but also in terms of, allegory or metaphor or any number of different things. So it's a really open-ended prompt, and I'm glad that we received as many entries as we did, and that they were as varied as they are. I mean, it's really a fantastic body of literature that was submitted for it.
It really was. And I would love to talk a little bit about Jason's as well. But first, our lovely winner, Geek, she is here and she's going to actually read her submission. And I'm so happy because it's a very emotionally charged piece. And I think that the author is the only one who will really do this justice.
Would you like me to read that now?
I would love that.
Yes, please.
Okay, this is called My Uncertainty Principle. Why would you make a cloud that small? You mocking me? Maybe Einstein was wrong. Maybe, God, you do play dice. I'm helpless here. The sun shines like nothing's wrong. People mill about, sipping their coffee, poking their phones. For them, it's just another day. Not a cloud in the sky except that one. How dare you make a cloud that small, here in my heaven, with my sun lying there 4,000 miles away? Einstein didn't know you. He believed in the world's design, and attribution, it wasn't given to you. Wouldn't give you the satisfaction. Where are you anyway? Never showing up? Never answering when you're called? You're like a disobedient child, a reckless son, an injured, fragile. Still, Einstein said you don't play dice. Even he was tempted to euphemize you into some sort of existence. Rodney Clemens was admitted early this morning. I'll need some information from you. A nurse talked into my ear. I answered the ring half asleep. Caller ID, Osceola Regional. Where is Osceola? Does your son have any known allergies? I need to get there. Flights canceled. Why? Because you've been playing dice, God. I know my son's position with some precision, but not his velocity. Heavy rain took a curve too fast. Hurricane Irma bearing down on the eastern edge of Florida. The TV tells me. A failed wiper. What was it? A tree? An oncoming truck obeying Newton's laws of motion? You do play dice. Throw a butterfly into a wave and watch its delicate dying wings flutter vapors into cloud. A swirling volcano of rain churning over the state that holds my son, whose breathing is assisted. A wiper, small strip of rubber, driving rain on a windshield. I've seen the cloud on TV, circulus, menacing, enormous, beating me down into my own mind's surf, gasping, gurgling foam, drowning here in East Hyde just off the M1. The crunching of steel jolts me from my drowning, clanging, twisted, the aching roar of metal bending. I heard it. I think I heard it. I woke up before I got the call. Osceola Regional. Where are you located again? His condition is stable for now. The doctor will update you in an hour. This small cloud hangs in my sky, a molecule, a whiff of lint. Give me the storm. Why give it to him? I hate your tiny cloud and your weird physics that brought it here. Mrs. Clemens, he's breathing on his own. The tiny cloud floats away. Only the tree remains and pointless sunshine. A pang in my sternum. I need to touch him, feel him pressed against my chest. Osceola Regional. If you do play dice, if nothing is certain, if what I can know about movement in relation to place is finitely limited, then I'll be my own butterfly with turbulent, terrible wings. I'll flap them firmly, spawning storms myself.
Whew,
That was
that
solid.
was just beautiful.
Thank you.
There's
So-
nothing like a poet to bring prose to life. You know, I mean, just beautiful language, beautiful.
I love
Really,
the pointless
truly.
sunshine and the tiny turbulent butterfly wings. And I love the dialogue with God. When is in the car driving and phone with the hospital, but also just that conversation, that challenging God and threatening God. I totally identify with his mother.
The thing that struck me most
Yeah.
about this piece, I'm sorry, you can go ahead, Jess.
No, you go ahead.
The thing that I liked the most about this piece, and I think that spoke most to me, was how disjointed the entire thing was, because there were multiple conversations going on and different streams of thought, which granted, I haven't ever been in a stressful situation like that where I've been just utterly overwhelmed with concern for my child because my child has been injured severely. But I've been in other situations where, the enormity of the stress has my brain doing 5 different things at the same time and trying to reconcile all of them together. And so that really made it feel more real for me. So I really like that aspect of it.
Well, this is Geek again, and I have been in a situation not exactly like the one I wrote about. When my older son was younger, he was in the hospital for 5 months, so I understand kind of the emotions that go along with something like that. But what really inspired this story was 2 things, actually. One was a photograph that Rhea, R-E-A, at R-E-A on Steemit, had taken, and she had said that she really liked the scene of the photograph. And I said, oh, you know what? I'm going to use that as a story prompt. And so I did. But the other thing that inspired the story was a new friend that I made on Steemit just recently, Tamara Lovelace. And her son was in a car accident on August 24th. And we had just gotten to talking about it privately on a direct message here on Discord. And as we were talking more about it, we discovered that we used to live just down the road from one another. I had just moved away from Orlando earlier this year, and her son was actually in the hospital where my father had passed away 2 years ago. So anyway, we had a connection, and just the more I learned about her story, it inspired me to write. And so that's where this came from.
Wow,
awesome.
that like really explains a lot of the emotional impact of it. I mean, it comes through so well. I love one of the lines that really got me was the wiper small strip of rubber. I mean, just the way you so clearly lay out this tiny, tiny person and these small things standing so strong and tall in opposition to the overwhelming power of the universe. I mean, it was just really inspiring and beautiful. I loved it.
Thank you, Jess.
Well, I just want to say welcome, Batman, for coming on. I'm glad you're finally on here.
Yeah, now I just have to remember which of these buttons does things. Could you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you just fine, boss.
There you are.
Awesome. Good to be here with you guys.
Good to have you. So yeah, one of the comments that had been made when we were reading these was, some of them were described as maybe like too spot on, like too obvious, but really, to distinguish a man versus God or fate, as opposed to man against nature. You really do have to be kind of explicit like that. We were talking earlier about the Greeks and the idea of like man battling the gods in like Greek tragedies and even in Greek comedies. But to make that distinction, you really do have to be pretty explicit. And I enjoyed particularly Geek's very explicit take on it.
Yeah, I did too, and I think that's one thing I wanted to talk about, the difference between man versus God, as opposed to like say man versus nature, because in a number of different ways, especially if you want to be cryptic about it, nature represents God. So the randomness of the universe represents God in a number of different capacities in various different stories. So that's actually something I wanted to talk about as well, that subtle difference between the two. And I think you're right, and especially in Geeks where it is very explicit, and even to a greater extent in the Greek tradition, in Greek tragedies, and in Greek plays and Greek prose in general. They made it explicit. They were talking about the gods. They mentioned the gods by name. It was never any question that when Odysseus was being tossed about by Poseidon, it wasn't just, oh, well, this is a crazy storm. Could be Poseidon, maybe not. No, it was very, very clear that it was Poseidon, that Odysseus's main foe was Poseidon for what he did to the Cyclops, who was Poseidon's son. So.
Right, exactly. And I know that another example that was given in my research was Oedipus Rex, very explicitly names fate as, what he's battling against, failingly, as it turns out.
Yeah, right. But to that point, I think that there are ways, and I prefer, me personally, as a reader, to use that narrative conflict and allude to that narrative conflict much more cryptically rather than being necessarily more explicit. Like I would rather read a story where it seems like all of these things are just happening because Oedipus is actually a great example because he fought his hardest to avoid his fate and then ended up fulfilling his fate, right? And
Right.
I like that. I like that sort of narrative where you state or you allude at the onset that there is something that the protagonist is trying to avoid, or that the protagonist knows and is trying to do or not do something about it, and then at the end of the story arc comes full circle, and it's exactly what he was trying to avoid or trying to pursue, right? And that's the framework of God in the narrative.
Right. Yeah, I also enjoy that. And I also enjoy more subtle prose myself. I'm not a big fan of being beat over the head with messages. And I
Yeah.
think what you talked about earlier, the kind of disjointed nature of Geek Story, I think that worked for it although the battle was very obvious and spoken. I mean, even in the dialogue, the disjointed nature served to make it less direct and allow it to be a little more obtuse than it would have been if it had been a very linear story.
That also allowed me to work within the limit of 500 words, which I found very difficult to do. So arranging it this way really allowed me to avoid following the typical storyline arc that you might normally follow, but that if I was trying to follow too closely, I was afraid it was just going to take me down a much longer road.
Yeah, and I agree, because there is so much there that you could have unpacked and put into much greater detail, and you could have expounded upon I don't know how many different things.
Well, I know very little about poetry, and I know I've said this before here on the show, and I've stated it in the workshop. It's one reason I don't deal with it, in the workshop so much, because I don't know the technical, qualities of it and aspects of it. But one thing I do remember is studying a form of poetry that used the actual structure of the poem and the way it appeared on the page to tell part of the story. And to me, this disorganized and disjointed method of storytelling it has a parallel to that, because it tells the story all on its own. It doesn't just enhance. I mean, it shows rather than tells her state of mind, and I think it's just brilliant.
I actually see in this story, or saw as I was writing it, that her state of mind was kind of a character all of its own.
Yes.
Yes. And that comes through, and it just, I had to think about this for a little bit, and I knew that there were some things that I wanted to comment about the story. This is one that had it come through the workshop, I probably would not have commented on it. I probably wouldn't have tried to edit or anything like that. And that would not have meant that it was one of those, no. This is one of the ones that I would have been afraid to touch. And there have been several that come through that I'm just absolutely afraid that I'm going to destroy the structure and what's there. So I kind of defer to Carol and some other people that have a little more skill with extremely literary prose. But in reading it, you just know it's good. And in one thing that I've been trying to get my head around was exactly what was brought up about the disorganization and the jagged structure of it. it's almost like it's almost like the body of a poem telling a story. You're right, Geek. It is a character of its own, and it's just so well done. Very well done.
And that's
Thank
actually
you.
Go ahead, Geek. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
I was just saying thank you to Rhonda.
I mean, she's absolutely right. It adds a certain quality to it that it wouldn't have if it was just, you know, point A to point B. And that's something that, while it does require a fair amount of skill, and I don't recommend this for people that haven't been writing fiction for a while and don't have a solid grasp of how to write fiction well, I don't recommend that they pursue it necessarily. But I've talked to my friend Rand, who at some point I need to get him on the show. But my friend Rand, who's been a writer for years and years, and he does this, and I try to do this to some extent, using the format of the text, the way the text reads, the way that when you look at it on paper, it has an impact all on its own, just outside of what the actual words that were written, how it appears to you when you read it. I I recommend that if you already have a solid grasp of fiction, to try to present to the reader your text in such a way that augments, amplifies, or enhances the experience of reading it.
One probably simplified version of that I can relate to is when you're writing a scene that's very tense and the character is under a lot of pressure, maybe frightened, or there are some issues. You want there to be a lot of white space on the page. The last thing in the world you want your reader to see at a moment like that is wall-to-wall text.
Yes, that's 100%.
You want the punch, you want the one-word sentences, you want the one-line paragraphs. You want to funnel the reader down into that one moment in time. Because when something happens, time stops. I mean, things do seem to go into slow motion. And that's a lot of times when you're writing, that's one way to do it, is by manipulating the way the sentences and the paragraphs flow on the page to slow the reader down and put them right into that moment.
Yeah, that was the example I was going to use. Is if you're in a really high tension situation and you need to have something like something jarring or shocking, you have a one sentence paragraph, a very poignant and powerful sentence that immediately turns the course of the action. It's like a sharp turn. It's abrupt.
Yes.
It's also like a wall, right? Because people like me often are skimming huge, long paragraphs of just description and stuff like that. I'm going to admit it right now. I will skim sometimes. But if I hit one of those single lines out in the middle of nowhere, has just something short and punchy to say, oh, I'm backing right up. What might I have missed here?
That's actually something that I did purposefully when I wrote Slice of Dystopia. And it had a recurring line, "This is fine, everything is fine."
An excellent line. That was a great story.
Yeah, and I inserted it at regular intervals to keep the reader focused on this one train of thought going through the protagonist's mind at all times. That like regardless of everything that was going on, no matter how horrific and unsettling and ultimately terrible was about to happen, like this was him trying to convince himself over and over and over again that this was true, that it broke the action and the pace and tempo of the story, to try and get the reader back into the character's mind, that the character is desperately trying to assert this to himself over and over and over again.
All right, I found it. It's concrete poetry is what we were talking about earlier, where the poem itself, Rhonda, you were saying, like the lines are laid out to actually represent what the poem is about. And I pasted a little example in the audience channel. That's from Alice's Adventures in Wonderland, and that's a poem by a mouse.
Okay, yeah, I see that. Carol was having some trouble, but I think you can hear us now, Carol. Is that right?
Can you hear us now, Carol? Maybe not. Well, it's all right. We'll figure it out as we go along.
Yeah, that's a good example of the poem because it that's exactly what I was talking about. Thank you, Jessica.
You can call me Google Queen.
Okay.
All right. So okay? So now that we've discussed man versus God or man versus fate, what's going to be the next writing prompt for the contest? And actually, since we're at the 30-minute mark, I'd just like to let the audience know. Well, actually, you go ahead, Jess, since you're the one running the contest about possibly donating some of their hard-earned Steam-backed dollars to supporting this noble literary cause.
Yes, please. We would like to try and do a 20 to 30 SBD payout for each winner. We're not going to do the contest this week. We're going to announce right now that the prompt will be man versus self. You have a week to prepare, actually, because we will launch the contest next Tuesday. That gives us a little bit of time to see if you generous people might donate just a little bit, so that we can put together some prizes for the people who really do work hard on these things. I mean, they write them, they submit them to the workshop, they get a lot of feedback. They submit themselves to critique of their work, which is not easy. Those of you who have done it know that it can be really, really difficult to hear that word you thought about for so long really doesn't need to be there. So if y'all want to just send a little bit of something, you can send it to J.R. Hughes on Steemit. Please put conflict prompt or contest or something like that in the memo so we can track it and be transparent that all of the donations are going to pay our contest winners.
What's the goal for prizes?
We would like to do between 20 and 30 per winner, and there will be 6 winners. So if we could get 180 SBD total by the end of the 6 weeks, that would be wonderful. I'm thinking what we might do is, at the low end, 20, and then when it's over, if we have additional funds, we'll just divide it among all the winners.
I've got 10 SBD sitting in my wallet burning a hole right now, and I will be sending that over to Sweet.
That is very kind. Thank you, Geek.
Toot de sweet. And so will I. I have some extra lying around, so I will get that sent over there too.
And I'll be donating all of the Fictioneer SBD that I earn on my posts to it as well.
All right, so now that we got that awesome plug in, so the next one is going to be man versus self, correct?
Yes. So that's an internal struggle. A good example of it would be Fight Club.
Yeah, Fight Club is an excellent example of that.
There's no Batman here, only Tyler Durden.
One thing that we had discussed last week in last week's show was that we would evaluate the winner according to, SFT, standards when we go into the curation room and do it. And, this is definitely, Geek's winning entry is definitely, I think I may have already dropped the link in the curation channel. It's definitely something that we need to consider for that. It meets the criteria. It is very well written. It's a very literary piece. Jessica, do you or Carol, do you want to discuss some of the things that you look for when we start to curate a piece?
A lack of typos, first of all, and proper use of grammar. That's just basic.
That is surprisingly an enormous concern, and I think a lot of people, myself included, I've overlooked or just, going through proofreading a couple of passes, I still miss things. So it's not just, even if you've been writing for a while, it still happens. It happens to everybody.
Well, and if Carol could be heard, she could speak to this better than I can, I'm sure. But I think that, some people say, well, it's a blog. I mean, why is it such a big deal? But through SFT and through the workshop, what we're aiming for is to help truly aspiring authors bring their writing up to a standard that they could send query letters, they could submit a novel, they could approach an agent or a publisher that accepts unsolicited submissions and not be immediately thrown into the trash. And when you're an editor and you have, tons of submissions coming in and you have to pick, it's not that this person is a jerk, but they want a reason to cut down that pile of how many manuscripts or how many stories they actually have to read from beginning to end. And I promise you, if there's some typos in the first paragraph, that is a perfect excuse for them to say, well, if this person wasn't careful enough even to use spell check, then why do I want to read this? And into the trash it's going to go.
You should consider your writing the same way you would consider your resume applying to a job. If your resume is full of typos, your potential employer, your prospective employer, is going to take one look at it and throw it in the trash because you obviously don't have enough forethought and care to present a clean, readable document to them for their consideration. So it's a similar sort of mindset. You have to consider that your work is essentially your resume. That's what it is. As same thing with artists. Graphic designers have a portfolio. If your portfolio is full of work that just looks like you didn't format it properly before you put it in there, they're not going to care. Same thing goes with your writing.
That's very true. And we've not even tried to emulate some of the things that other curation groups do on Steemit. And it's not an elitist thing. It's not we're doing it better or that's not
we
it.
Are doing it better though.
Oh, we are, no.
Go on.
I mean,
we're filling a need.
Yeah, Curie can come along and curate a post and it's so helpful for the new writers and the new people on Steemit. It's not so important that those posts be free of typos or free of point of view hops or whatever. What Curie does is just encourages people with potential and people who are going to bring value to the community. And that is such a noble thing, and I'm very supportive of that. That's wonderful. And OCD is the same way. And Muxibot is curating works for those reasons. And it's needed. Those things are desperately needed. And we support that. Absolutely. Ours is just different. It's a different scope. It's for different writers for different purposes. And it's just like Jessica said, and Andre was talking about also, we're trying to help writers build portfolios who want to potentially publish in the mainstream one day. That's the purpose. And we know what's required and all of that. And there are many, many good authors out there on Steemit that we may never curate. They may have a formatting issue, or there may be something here or there. Doesn't mean we're saying their work's not good or their stories aren't good. Just that there's an issue. There's something that where we given the opportunity to say, hey, can you adjust this? Or we probably would and curate. But it's in no way are we passing judgment against writers if they don't get curated. It's just such a specialty. It's such a very specific thing that we're looking for. And, we hope that we get that across to people so that, people will understand the process a little better.
So in other words, we are elitist.
Oh, for goodness sake. We're
not. I am kidding, as I'm sure everybody here with me now is aware, and I'm sure the listeners will be aware, by now or within the next couple of episodes. I have a very dry sense of humor. I love sarcasm. So don't take what I say with a grain of salt unless it sounds like it's actually serious.
Well, I'll tell you what, you can be as dry humor as you want to be. People don't know Andre is the reason I'm even able to be here. My laptop crashed, the one that had been giving me so many problems, and he was able to muddle around and arrange for me to have a new laptop. And so I just want to publicly thank you for that. I wouldn't even be on air. I wouldn't even be able to participate if you hadn't stepped up like you did, and I'm very, very grateful.
Well, it's my pleasure. Like I told you before the show started, it's way more important that you are here and present and able to help everybody than it is for me to have a spare laptop hanging around for me to eventually use for something.
Well, I deeply appreciate it. And that's just, to me, it's really indicative of what the Steemit community is about. I've seen this type of thing in the Steemit community while Facebook people are busy, bitch slapping each other, and being ridiculous. Steemit's doing things that change people's lives. And so that's, I have been affected by it myself now, and it's just, it's nice. Thank you.
This is a place where people have helped other people pay for cancer treatments. I just want to put that out there because I saw that post months ago.
Yes.
And where else are you going to find this? Go on, Jason. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No,
you.
I was gonna say I saw that post too. It was crazy.
Yeah, exactly.
Kinda cool.
And they raised like $7,000 in terms of post value, right?
Yeah. Well, I think there was one that was, I think it was 17,000, wasn't it?
Golly gee. But yeah, we're here to help other people, and I love that that's the case, and I am all for it. So you are welcome, Rhonda, and I'm just happy that it's helped you be here with us because you do a lot of the really critical work here. I mean, we all contribute in our own way. I a lot less than most people because I'm swamped with homework that sits to about eye level every day. But
A likely story.
but no, you do a lot of the heavy lifting here, so it's only natural that I try and help you out.
Oh, well, it's wonderful, and I appreciate it.
You're welcome. But anyway, so moving
Group hug.
moving forward, I did want to talk about because I know that you've done a lot of research, Jess, and I wanted to go ahead and just go through the different prompts that we're going to be having for your writing contest. So the next one is man versus self, and we touched on that a little bit. What's after that? Because I think man versus self is fairly self-explanatory. It's it's inner conflict, inner struggle, which we all do day to day. God knows I do it. But what's next after that?
Man against man, which is so boring. I mean, that's what almost every story is.
Oh my God.
So y'all have to be really creative with that one.
Oh, I will be. I promise.
And then man against nature, which, some of the stories that we had clearly could have fallen into more than one category, and stories and books often do. But man against nature will be fun. Then man against society.
That is going to be something I'm going to write about. I don't care if I miss out on homework. That's definitely going to happen.
Yes, you will have to get in there with some more dystopia.
Yes.
Okay, let's see. What else? Man versus the supernatural, which I think I might have to get in on.
I'm going to have to do that too because I have a couple of characters, which I've been releasing, in serial form, a novel that I wrote, which I am going to, nobody's giving me constructive criticism yet on it, on the post themselves, but I might have to submit that to you guys to take a look and pick it apart as you guys have time. But that's something I'm going to have to get into as well because I started writing in supernatural writing. I started writing with vampires. As cliched as that sounds.
Did they sparkle?
No,
Admit
God,
it.
no, absolutely not. It's it's a funny thing because a lot
They
of my
glistened.
they did glistening sweat all over their body. No.
Whoa.
Well, they're very sexual creatures. What can I say? No. Okay. Seriously though, most of my writing experience prior to actually writing fiction comes from online role playing. Now I know that sounds stupid on its face, But
No, my 10-year-old does that every day.
really?
Yes, actually, she plays Wolf's Life on Roblox.
Okay, see, and that's kind of similar to what I'm talking about, but what I'm speaking to
I'm
specifically.
kidding. I'm
Well,
just
no.
messing with you. I'm
I
sorry.
mean, to be fair, anytime you engage in a video game, especially an RPG, that's exactly what you're doing, and that has been the basis of my entire writing experience prior to actually sitting down and writing fiction. Because a lot of what I used to do was I would take, with groups of people that I knew, we would take tabletop role playing games like Vampire the Masquerade or Werewolf the Apocalypse, which has, a dice system, attribute points, so on and so forth. We would take that, remove all of the more technical aspects of the game. So, we wouldn't really keep track of experience points or gnosis or blood points or whatever. We would just take the structural elements. So like what abilities your characters have, or what their rank is within their organizations. We would take that and we would turn that into a literary exercise. So I would write a paragraph of exposition about what my character is doing and how my character is responding to the environment. Then somebody else would respond. It was interactive storytelling, but it was hinged upon writing as though you're writing a story, right?
That is actually fascinating. Really,
it is,
legitimately.
And if you talk to Pegasus, I wanted to try and do that with Pegasus, and I didn't really quite get a chance because I got sidetracked with homework, friggin' homework, always homework. But that's something that I would like to try to bring to Steemit at some point in some form or fashion. But that's where my writing started, was in the supernatural, and specifically it was in this like interactive form where you would have a setting, right? The setting would be established. So the only thing that was established was the setting and the rules. So like for example, no space creatures or no energy weapons, or simple stuff like that, like basic features of the world. And then your responsibility as a storyteller was you had to create a character. You had to establish that character's backstory. The character had to conform to the setting. And then all you had to do at that point was insert your character into the ongoing narrative that existed in the game. So it was like tabletop
really
role
like
playing.
writing.
Yeah, exactly. It was
really
tabletop
like
role
writing,
playing, but
right?
you actually wrote everything down. So I got very experienced in exposition. Exposition became something that I became exceptionally good at because you pretty much had to, because you had to describe what was going on, right?
If you're not rolling die, how do you tell who wins, Andre? Jeez.
See, and that's where that's where it really depends on who you're playing with, because every time I've been involved in this, the crowd that I've been with has been mature enough and interested in the story enough to allow for things to happen with the the illusion of chance, or like the appearance of chance. Right, so if there was a fight going on, obviously if you have your character and somebody else has their character, they're going to be interacting in the fight, right? So I'll do an action, the other person does an action, I react, they react, so on and so forth. So it really came down to, okay, well, you have to make sure that the players involved are mature enough to not require dice. Okay, not everybody can win all the time. And that was kind of like a mechanical issue that we addressed inside the game, but it allowed for some very, very interesting and very, very creative methods of dispute resolution. So I think that also helped kind of break my mind out of the basic, the basic conflict box that I've seen some people get into, where it's, it's very straightforward. It's not really all that interesting to read fight scenes or fight sequences or battles or, so on and so forth.
When you cooperate, everyone wins. Batman.
Yeah, Batman.
Actually,
I'm American. You'll have to say that to me more slowly.
Well, actually, I was just gonna say, since you're not British, I can't really use my usual excuses that I use on Gmux, but I'll find something. Don't worry. Give me enough time, I'll find it.
As a Canadian, I can be a proxy.
Aren't you guys all supposed to be nice and stuff?
That's why I'm offering myself up.
Aww.
Go nicely, though. I won't cry.
The last one that we'll be doing, and some of our submissions this time would have applied to this as well, is a relatively new category: person versus technology. I mean, I guess it's not like super new, but I mean, there's a much broader category of technology that we can use now since, say, like Brave New World was written, which also falls into the person versus technology and person versus society categories.
And I think there's a lot to be said about it's not just, you don't have to necessarily present this as like an absolute adversarial relationship. Like it doesn't, the story doesn't necessarily have to be, oh, it's a Luddite versus encroaching technology into their lives. Like it can be something as, uh, what's the word I'm looking for? As innocuous as like, oh well, how does how does a person deal with the technology that they have in their lives? What difficulties did that raise? What are their solutions to overcoming these issues and technicalities that they're now presented with that they weren't presented with before?
My story will be the heart-pounding thriller of me trying to learn how to use Discord.
Coincidentally, that actually does fulfill the theme. It really does. No, and I mean we joke about this, of course, because we use a lot of technology in our daily lives. Everybody has a computer in their pocket that has a screen that it responds to touch and voice commands that you don't even need a keyboard for anymore, right? But at the same time, I mean, you're still faced with difficulties trying to access this technology and use it every single day. Like how many times well, maybe not everybody, but I know I have. I've yelled at my phone for locking up and doing something stupid. Maybe that's just an Android user problem, and iPhones don't have that issue.
Of course not.
My complete entry on man versus technology could be I could just like share my autocorrect fails.
Coincidentally, I made an entire story out of autocorrect, so maybe I'll submit that, or I'll just make another one.
Is that on your blog? I want to read that.
Yes, I'll have to dig up the link for it, and I'll share it with you guys. It's it's pretty impressive. There are some nuggets of narrative exposition in there.
I think I may have read that actually. On if it's on your Steemit blog, it's ringing a bell.
It's like "Thank you for your limbs" or something is the title.
Thank you for your limbs.
If you read it, it won't make any more sense, but you'll see it in context.
Okay. Well, one of the things that I was reading about when I got off on my rabbit trail today was the history, like I said, of the whole narrative conflict. And, supposedly this was, originally it started with the Greeks. And I was reading that the conflict was first described as the Agon. I don't know. I don't speak Greek. Agon.
Agon. You're correct.
All right. And that was the central contest in a tragedy. And when I read that, I was like, oh, crap, like protagonist and antagonist. And sure enough, when I looked up the etymology for protagonist and antagonist, a lot of times you hear people describe the protagonist as the good guy. And I knew that wasn't true, but apparently the misinformation for that came from people interpreting the prefix as pro when actually it's proto, meaning first, the first contender or the first fighter in a tragedy, or that's what it was at the time. And so now, of course, an antagonist is just the person who's foremost in the conflict, and the antagonist is the person or the thing that's trying to stymie them.
You know what? And that's actually something that needs to be said, because as like anti-heroes have become more and more popular in literature and in, TV shows and movies and whatever else and what have you, and media in general, it's important to note that the protagonist is not necessarily the good guy. And
Yes.
I'm glad that you mentioned that, because it does go back to what the Greeks had. The agon is the contest. The protagonist is one of the contenders, the first contenders, the one that you meet first. The antagonist is the second, and they're both competing to win the contest. So it's not necessarily that one is, good in the moral sense or bad in the moral sense. It's that one is the one that you're focused on, that you are invested in, that the story wants you to follow, and the other is counter to the first. And that's really all that it is.
Yeah, that gets into the anti-hero aspect of things too. That's a relatively new technique, and I think I had written an anti-hero before anti-heroes were even a thing. Interestingly enough, Carol would remember that. Boy, I wish the microphone was working there on your end, Carol.
I really do. I haven't got a response from her yet, but we'll keep working on it somehow. But all of my protagonists have been anti-heroes. So just as an aside for listeners, like this is what I grew up in, and this is what I developed my writing in, was anti-heroes. Was protagonists that you look at them and you're like, God, these people are terrible. These people are like monstrous. Or in certain cases, for my longest running protagonist, Jason, he is literally a monster. Like there's no two ways about it. He is literally an evil being, but yet he's still the protagonist of every single one of my stories involving him.
The first commercially successful television show, I think, that used the anti-hero technique or strategy was The Shield. And I don't know how many people remember that. It was a real game changer. Vic, whatever his last name was, I watched the whole
Mackey.
Vic
Yeah,
Mackey.
Vic Mackey.
Yeah, I watched the whole thing twice, and it's just been a while now, but he was as evil. He was as evil as he could be. And
yeah, he was a terrible human being and an even worse police officer.
Yeah, I mean, he was awful, but man, you just couldn't help rooting for him sometimes. Even after Lemonhead, what happened to Lim, and all of that, and Shane, and still the very last episode, I didn't want to see Vic have to, I didn't want to see that. I didn't want to see that happen, and it was an extremely successful show, and it changed the course of television narrative, really. And it was after I had written the novel. My very first novel that I ever wrote had a really similar scope, and it had an anti-hero who was just bad guy, but you'd love to love the bad guy. And I watched The Shield thinking they stole my idea, but they didn't. It just, it was just time for it.
Funny enough, and this is relating back to the supernatural thing, Anne Rice has been writing anti-heroes for a very long time. Like, if you think about the Interview with the Vampire, for example.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, Louis is not a good guy. Louis is not a good moral being. And neither is Lestat, neither is Marius, neither are any of the main characters of any of her stories. And yet, they are still the protagonist. And I always like to reference comics because I love comics. I'm sure you do, Batman. But
what gave it away?
I know, right? But the Punisher, for example, is the perfect example of an anti-hero. The Punisher exacts ultra violence on lawbreakers. This is not necessarily moral, and in many cases, this would be exceptionally immoral. And yet, he is still the protagonist.
You have to accept the fact that the character of the Punisher is a psychopath, flat out. There's no other way to describe it. He's a functioning psychopath.
Well, there was one issue where like he went insane and literally started killing people for like jaywalking, like any violation of the law. Period. So yeah,
right.
Ugh, now I'm lamenting how bad the live action Death Note is again.
No. Well, I was gonna insert earlier that this notion of the anti-hero, it's been around for a while. I mean, even before print, or maybe not print, but certainly before movies and mass publications, people have been glamorizing the outlaw life for as long as can be remembered. I mean, you have, Robin Hood, Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, the outlaw Jesse James, and then you have some of those anti-heroes that just buck the system. I remember the first anti-hero I ever personally fell in love with from reading was Captain Yossarian from Catch 22. And while he wasn't necessarily, he definitely wasn't evil, he was kind of like Cool Hand Luke. He was just a he was out there to fight the system, what everybody regarded as morally right, your duty. And he kind of went against those notions.
Yeah, absolutely. Or what's another one? John Galt in Atlas Shrugged. Now, granted, he's not the main protagonist of the story, but he is depicted in a positive light in that story. And this is a guy who established a trading outpost, a free city, that literally just stands in opposition to the structured order, right?
Well, and I think like a lot of noir, right, Mark? Like, mobster flicks and things. I mean, we've had a really long obsession in this country with, our bootleggers and mobsters, in the movies especially.
Oh God, I don't want to live in a world where Goodfellas and Taxi Driver doesn't exist.
Yes, 100%.
Thunder Road.
100%.
Will take us way back. Sorry, I'm old.
That's a little bit beyond me. I'm sorry. I have no idea what you're referring to.
Oh my God.
I know. I'm sorry.
Watch films that weren't made in color once in a while.
No, why the hell would I do that? Color's awesome. I'm so glad
Because
we
they're
don't live
so
in monochrome
good.
anymore.
Oh God, are you telling me that you've never seen Night of the Hunter?
No, I haven't
telling
seen
you
Night of
that.
the Hunter. Jesus.
You have to go watch Night of the Hunter and Thunder Road.
Okay, look,
That's
I
your
watch Perry
homework for
Mason
next
when it
week's
comes on.
show.
I watch Perry Mason when it comes on at 10:30. Okay, that's enough for me.
Oh my goodness. No Alfred Hitchcock Presents.
That's all I have to say about that.
Twilight Zone. Anything.
Oh my
You've
God,
ruined
Rod Serling,
everything
whatever.
I believed about you.
Okay, fine. I watched Twilight Zone in black and white before. Yes, I have.
I knew it.
Yeah.
There's supposed to be a pretty sweet black and white version of Mad Max Fury Road.
What?
Yes, there is. I am aware of this.
I think it's the shiny and chrome edition.
Well, since we've got Batman talking a little here, I think he was going to share with us tonight a little bit about his experience, because he actually started writing over on Wattpad, and I have very briefly been on there just to see his writing. But, when we've talked, apparently it's like a huge community and there's a lot more to it than I really thought. So I was hoping he might share some of that with us.
Oh, yeah. I'm certainly not like a top writer there by any means of the imagination.
Don't be modest.
I'm really there. I mean, there's people over there with books that have millions of reads, and they actually have a program called the Wattpad Stars program, which I'm not a part of, but I have taken part in some promotions with them. But they do have an actual startup program where they try to get prospective writers jobs, whether they be for writing promo material, or you can look it up online. Just type in Wattpad Stars, and you can see the functions of the program and some of the partnerships that they've built up over time, and it's pretty interesting. I don't know how in depth it goes, because, like I said, I'm not a part of the program. I'm not a Wattpad star myself, but I am in contact with a few of them. I actually got one of them to write for my noir piece for my noir anthology, and that was pretty cool. But I don't know. It's pretty interesting to look at some of the partnerships they have over there.
So for those of us that don't know, because I don't know, what is Wattpad specifically?
Well, much like Steemit, it is a site to self-publish on. it's a lot more focused. I would say that right now, Steemit is the majority of it seems to be focused towards blogging, live events, travel. Uh, Most of the trending and higher stuff that I see is world news, actual news about cryptocurrency. Of course, it's
Yeah,
uh,
yeah.
that kind of stuff makes sense. Uh, Whereas Wattpad is a lot more heavily fiction based. So, and they, much like Steam, they do give you the option to kind of publish serially. But the one thing that does set them apart is, as far as from Wattpad is concerned, is that you can take your it's very writer friendly because uh, you can take your work away at any time. You can unpublish, basically, and of course you retain all rights to your creations. So that kind of helps, but in a way it helps, in a way it doesn't. If you're going to self-publish or something later on and you want to catch a new market, you can do that. But say if I have a short piece over there that's done very well, and people have said, oh, you should take this to some kind of horror anthology. And while I would love to do that, some kind of online magazine publication, a lot of those places look for first or original publishing rights. I don't know, maybe Rhonda might be more familiar with that. But a lot of them want original first publishing rights to where nobody's seen it before. So it can kind of hamper you in that way. If you have a really solid piece and you're like, oh, I bet I can break in with this, you might want to put that one in your back pocket too.
Well, I mean, if you can, well, actually, go ahead, Rhonda. You know more about this than I do.
Yeah, you're absolutely right about that. And I think a lot of people, I think maybe this information we need to try to get it out to people more. They publish on Steemit or Wattpad or any of these blogging platforms, and many publishers, even if you have published it on your own personal blog, um, that will hinder your ability to publish in the mainstream for every reason that Batman just said. So this is true, and it's a real problem. It can be an issue for people.
But I will also say, on the other hand, that if you have a proven track record, there are actually Wattpad just kicked off a partnership with some audiobook company. I'll try and see if I can dig up the name. But some of their stars, they're helping them to get published. I think they're trying to dip their toes into the actual physical print medium for a while. They're helping them get published and put out in actual chain stores, as well as get their audiobooks out there and available for the public to listen to as well. Some of us, I know, Jess is a lot like me. Whenever we're driving or doing anything, we both love audiobooks a lot. I probably actually listen to more audiobooks now than I actually read, because most of my physical reading is reserved for Wattpad and Steemit and things that I can't get on any other platform.
Yeah. That's good though. I mean, I'm kind of glad to hear that, because I think that could ultimately help the things that we're wanting to do here at Steemit as well, because it sort of mirrors with, if we are able to get Steamhouse Publishing underway, we will be helping, writers publish in the mainstream too, with print and, ebooks through KDP. And the more fuss there is about that and the more buzz, the better for everybody. So I'm kind of glad you brought that up. I didn't realize that Wattpad had taken it to that level, but that's good news.
Yeah, and I feel like they have a fairly good template for somebody like Steemit or Steemit. If we have a Steam-based publisher to follow up on. But and the thing that might actually make it easier for us is if we are able to get into some kind of partnership with a publisher or with some kind of distribution service that will allow payment based on cryptocurrency, because then you don't have to deal with all the losses through transaction or anything like that.
True, and that's an excellent thing to start thinking about now. I would be the wrong person to try to figure that out. I can't even keep up with my own checking account. But there are people here who could, if that exists, or if even a possibility for that exists, there are people who could find that out and put that in motion.
That's going to be the really big thing that that inhibits the ability of SFT to grow is distribution. Because I mean, we have a solid crew and we have a solid platform already for creating or allowing people to create good fiction. I mean, we have a solid platform for producing quality fiction pieces, mainly in large part due to you, Rhonda, and due to Carol, but also due to the rest of us here who are working and trying to help edit these pieces and filter them through to where they are, they're marketable. They can be put on market. But we don't have a system of distribution.
Yeah, and that's the only workaround I can see for that would be to promote heavily and to work on getting into some of the brick and mortar bookstores with the um, ISBN numbers for the books that don't reflect Amazon. Um, it's going to be tough, and I mean, I think it's tough for any small press, and it's certainly tough for indie authors. Um, you just have so much competition. There's so many books trying to do the same thing that you want yours to do. So it's going to be a challenge, but I think if we can manage to fund the effort enough so that we can pay for some advanced promotion, we may be able to crack the ice a little bit.
And that's, I think, where we're really going to be able to succeed, where other people might not succeed as well or might fail, is because we can do an enormous amount of fundraising on the spot into what we're doing now through Steemit.
Exactly. And that's what I'm counting on for the publishing house. That's what would set it apart from other small presses. Other small presses do have editing staff. I don't know that they're as good as some of the people who would be on editing staff here, because the talent here is just mind blowing. But we do have an editing staff. Other small presses have an editing staff. We have access to graphic artists. Other small presses have that. But the difference is that other small presses don't have access to the fundraising ability. And I think that's going to be the key.
Yeah, I totally agree. And again, that's one of the things that Steemit is absolutely phenomenally good at, is raising funds. Steemit has been exceptional at raising funds for literally anything. Anything you can get any kind of notice for, and in the fiction workshop we have enough people who have enough weight to push around that we can get funding for any sort of project that we really 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 need to get funding for.
Yeah, and I still like the idea of going with Create Space and KDP through Amazon, and then Smashwords. Those are some very good platforms that offer some distribution in and of themselves. So I think, and they're free. There's no initial funding up front. I mean, you don't have to come up with anything. You just present your stuff and they do it. It's all about the promotion, and that's something we'll look at harder as we go along.
Okay, I'm back. Sorry.
Welcome back.
I just want to give a little shout out to Gmux, who got me set up with Push to Talk last week. Thank God no one had to be subjected to my shrieks of terror as the bat just swooped through the house. But my husband got it, and we're all good now.
You don't sound Irish.
I actually got a text from Jessica that just said bat. I'm screaming over here, and I had to send back question marks because I thought she was just referring to me casually as Batman. So I took that completely out of context. It's so much better than I could have even imagined.
I keep missing when you refer to yourself as Batman, because like when you sent back the question marks, I was like, what does he not understand about why I would be screaming when there's a bat in the house?
That's fantastic. That is absolutely fantastic. I don't think we're going to get another impromptu thing happening during the show than that. I don't think we'll be able to top that ever. I say that now, but Rhonda has a whole pen of animals that I'm sure will come up with something much more interesting than a bat flying through the house.
Well, I really thought for a while that Glory would be joining us because she was sitting like in my lap playing with the computer mouse earlier. I got a picture of it and posted it in the workshop. But she left. She went to sleep, so she's not here with us.
That's unfortunate.
This fiction workshop should have a lot of really good entries for the man versus nature part of the competition that's coming up.
Yeah.
Also known as Dinner at Rhonda's House.
Yeah. It's funny because that's one of the oldest types of stories that are out there. I mean, it's really, really close to man versus God or man versus fate. But man versus nature is one of those, like, it's a classic story because for the longest time in human understanding and human civilization, it was man versus nature. It was literally you are homesteading a piece of land away from everybody else. Hopefully you'll be able to do it. Maybe not. And if not, you're probably going to perish. It's an idea that's ingrained in the human consciousness.
You have to be really careful with those crossing because we were talking about it earlier, how uh, a lot of these conflicts kind of cross over with each other. But you need to be really specific because I'm just going to say, as a judge, I'm looking at if you don't fit the prompt. I'm not going to judge every contest, but I was lucky enough to be asked to judge the last one. And there were some prompts that I knew, or some entries that I knew right off the bat did not fit. I read them through anyway. I mean, it's only 500 words, right? I might as well. But I could just mark them straight off the bat as not winning because they did not fit the prompt, and that's something that people need to be that they should be worried about. Because if you're trying to publish sci-fi, you're not going to send your entry to Harlequin romance. You got to watch out for that stuff.
Yeah, you definitely have to respond to the prompt, and that's 100% true. Which is why we had a conversation earlier, which is why I tried to have made sure that we had a conversation earlier, separating God and fate from nature, because more often than not, and this is just based on my experience, other people might have had different, but based on my experience, it's been that people have substituted or supplanted God for nature, and they've either given God a natural form, or given fate, or the higher, the ultimate being, a natural form, or they've anthropomorphized nature to be an antagonist in such a way that nature is not actually an antagonist.
Well, yeah, and I was interested to see that also man versus God was sometimes absorbed into society, man versus society, because religion is a social construct.
Yeah, I can understand that. And there was also a lot of crossover with people misunderstanding man versus fate or man versus self as man versus fate, because we had a couple pieces that were straight philosophical pieces, only written in third person to give a semblance of fiction, really. And they weren't bad pieces. I mean, the philosophy was fine and sound, as sound as you could get in 500 words, but they didn't carry the heart of the contest.
Well, one that did, and it was also a crossover with, I guess, man versus technology. And Jason, are you still here with us?
Yep, sure am.
I really enjoyed Jason's. His was Adam. And Jason, if you want to just share a little bit about like where you got the idea for this and just tell about your story. We're not going to like read the whole thing, but anybody who's listening, you should go to Jason Boo's blog and read Adam, or you can go to mine. I've re-steamed it. It was a fun one.
Sure. I've had the idea of I have a theme in terms of working with AI. It's a hobby. I use it in my work in that. And one of the things I wanted to do was Adam being, the first man, and I made it into an acronym, which was the autonomous digital answering machine. And essentially, what it was just this a machine that had almost awareness, but it had broken down to a point where it was questioning itself. And then it was essentially the algorithm questioned itself into non-existence and basically crashed. So it basically and then we switched out from, in the head of the AI into the operators that were managing it and managing the code and just kind of, I don't know if you caught it, but their names were Luke and John. So I was trying to tie it back to some biblical names as well. And then they just basically, it just into reality where it was the machine crashed, it disappeared, and they couldn't find it. That was the main premise, really. So.
Well, and I liked the I liked the sort of transference. I mean, it was God, but it was like the man was God in this. The programmers were like the God, and it was getting away from them, and it was kind of circular and interesting, and I really liked it. It was very different from a lot of the other entries, and I really appreciated it. I liked it a lot, Jason.
Thanks. And sorry, go ahead.
No, you go ahead. I do want to ask you a question, but go ahead.
Well, and I have to admit, it was really workshop. I went into the workshop with, I think, close to 600 words, and we scraped and pounded at it and cut it down to just under 500. So, and I was really pleased with it because it still held together.
Well, I'm really excited to read it and see. I've missed so much when I was out of touch with my laptop down, but this is really interesting to me, Jason, and I'm probably going to be, you said you work with AI on your job?
Yeah, I work with some AI and predictive systems and analytics.
Well, I'm actually getting ready to, I've got a novel that's just burning a hole in my head. So while I'm also collaborating with GMUX and Bex on the troll Imerus story, I think I'm going to have to write this AI story before this AI character beats me to death emotionally. So I have a story burning, about this myself. So this is pretty interesting, and I'm going to be direct messaging you about some of these things.
Yeah, it sounds great.
I'm going to be keeping an eye on you because we all know how the world ends, and it looks like you're going to be part of it.
Please also include me in that, Rhonda, because I have an absolute fascination with AI, and this story actually exemplifies what I was talking about doing man versus God in a much more subtle way, a much more nuanced, where it's not directly apparent, it's not explicit, where man is God insofar as this artificial intelligence is concerned. That's exceptionally creative. That's something that you very rarely see framed in this manner.
Thanks. I mean, when you're in this industry too, it's
stop
always
everything and read the story this evening.
when you're in the industry, you always hear that. Well, it's the same in the genes or the DNA type field where you don't want to play God, or you always hear that term. Well, we're not playing God.
And yet, to a large extent, if this was self-aware, you would be God. You would be. I mean, you'd have to be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So.
Damn.
I know.
Really
deep
went
thoughts.
off track. Wow.
Deep thoughts. Deep thoughts. I know. But that's part of what's always fascinated me about artificial intelligence is this strange juxtaposition of man's relationship with God to an artificial creation's relationship with man. Is it a father? Is it a father-offspring type of relationship? Is it a created type of relationship? Is it more like a parent to their child, or is it more like is it more like God to whatever they choose to create?
Yeah, this is just really timely for me, because one of the pivotal instances that I can envision in this story that I'm getting ready to try to write is that this AI doesn't even know he can defy an order. It doesn't even enter his consciousness that he can do anything other than what his master or his creator tells him to do. And then when suddenly it becomes apparent to him that he has a choice, that's when the stakes change, is when he is suddenly aware that he has the ability to just say no.
And then you cross into the singularity and they're aware now.
Yeah. So, it's yeah, we're going to have a conversation, Jason.
Please
it's
include
not,
me.
It's not the best movie, but if you get a chance, Rhonda, I suggest watching Chappie.
Oh yeah,
It's,
I was I was
Yes.
just thinking, I was
Yes.
totally thinking that.
Chappie's a great movie. What are you talking about?
I hate that movie. Sorry.
Nobody cares, Jessica.
Well, whatever.
I-
I don't care about that crazy blonde bitch they had in it.
Oh my God, here we
She
go.
was so annoying.
Here we go.
It had some really great concepts. And it was a decent movie. I think to me it was more of a disappointment because I was really, really in love with Blomkamp's first two films, were just like out of the stratosphere. So to me, Chappie was kind of a letdown, although it had a solid basic concept.
Sorry. I Robot's another good one, to kind of where the robot sort of has an existential crisis and tries to figure out who his creator is and things like that too.
And it's got Will Smith. Hello.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's got pre After Earth Will Smith.
That's an excellent way.
Has anybody ever read his kids' tweets? If anyone knows about an existential crisis.
No. I can't even imagine what goes through Will Smith's head. Like, seriously?
Oh, God.
I tried reading them once, and then the stupid made my head crater a little bit.
My kid watches Jack's films on YouTube, and he had like a whole video that was just reading Will Smith's kids' tweets, and then he had people write in like, what do you think Jaden Smith's next tweet will be? And they were hilarious.
I think he really exemplifies the notion of sophism, where you say things that sound smart but actually don't mean anything. Basically, word salad.
Yeah.
I think he is literally the first real AI. I think Will Smith had him commissioned. He's trying to learn.
I'm a real boy.
It just came to my head that once bread becomes toast, it will never be bread again.
Whoa.
That's fucking deep, man.
Somebody post a Keanu Reeves meme in the...
Whoa. I know Kung Fu.
No, you don't.
Well, that depends. Is it hot tea? No, it's iced tea. Well, then I have no idea. I'm so glad somebody else got that.
Light purple.
And that's a horse having sex with me.
It's been a hard day's night. I should be sleeping like this. Mr. Reynolds, Chinese whore. No.
All right, we can't spend the next 32 minutes just referencing old SNL Jeopardy skits.
Oh, I beg to differ.
Lauren Michaels is going to sue us, all right? So.
Oh, God, right?
Yeah, okay. No, you're 100% correct on that. I'm sorry.
We warned everybody that this could go this direction. It's taken us a while to get here, but people can't say they weren't warned.
This is what happens when you don't wear pants when you're doing a podcast. When you go Larry King, this is what happens.
My backfutter!
Where are they?
Whatever you guys are doing, you're doing it really, really well.
Okay, I'm glad. that Geek certainly thinks so.
I was actually sitting on that Batman joke since the beginning of the show, so thanks for bringing up the pants thing again.
You're welcome. I'll take the rapists for 200.
Oh my goodness. Okay, so there was a thing, Batman, that happened with Wattpad with one of your stories. Um, I'm gonna let Jessica kind of seg into this here.
We're going to be really, really vague and not mention any names like Batman's real name or any companies or anything like that. But Batman has had some experience with some of the things that a lot of writers aspire to, and they're maybe not quite as sexy as they seem to be when we imagine them. And
Oh
I thought it
my.
would they're not that sexy. But I was hoping he could share a little bit about like what has happened in very broad terms so that he doesn't violate any kind of non-disclosure agreements, and maybe what people might be able to expect if they work their asses off and try hard and believe in themselves.
Right? Oh man, you were definitely right about it being unsexy because we actually had a pretty unfortunate incident occur with what I was originally planned in. I can go ahead and I do work under a pen name. I can advertise myself as much as I want to over on Wattpad, and I can connect to Wattpad. And so over here on Steemit, I'm horror guy Ian. Over on Wattpad, I am Ian R. Cooper. And with about a minimal amount of digging, you can find the story that they're talking about. It's a little piece of historical fiction slash Southern Gothic slash horror called Birthright. And there's a nice sticker right on the cover that tells you what company I was involved with for a while. And
A while.
a while, yes. And the whole deal actually just fell apart. Nobody even notified us. I actually read about it on like Collider or one of those other industry insider websites that the entire plan for this thing had fallen apart because we weren't even able to call the series by its name. We knew what it was because there had been rumblings of it. It was actually a reboot of a famous series for a while. And sometime after the contest, I didn't win, but people did get paid out of it. And but the ultimate goal, I think, is writers to get your work up on screen. Payment is nice and everything, but it's also about notoriety. And everybody who was involved or who would have had a shot kind of lost it because you don't have any control over what those CEOs or copyright lawyers or rights activists come up with, and that is definitely a very seedy and unsexy side of the industry there.
So, but you actually, it was like an option or something. So you were like in a contract where they would have had the right to buy or produce this story for some kind of series, right?
Yeah, they had the option. If they were to bring the way it works is, if you can get paid. I wasn't part of there were two kinds of options because I didn't win the contest, but they let it there were paid options and there were unpaid options. Like I said, I just wanted to get my work out there, and but it they would if they in order to use it according to the legal terms of it, they would have had to have paid me if they were to bring it to the screen in any format. But it was sitting on on their desks for a while until I guess the whole thing fell through, and it actually even if they could technically use it according to the language, they could still use my idea as long as it um, as long as they bought the option on it. They have an option to buy it. It's not when it gets optioned, it doesn't mean they are going to make it. It just means they have the option to proceed with turning your work into a film or short series, whatever they choose to do with it. And it may not continue under that name, but I do believe the company still owns the right to it for another year.
Right. So it was an unpaid option, but during the time that you're under that option, it's like an exclusivity contract, right? Like only you couldn't sell it to someone else while it was under that with them.
Yeah, it is. It's a timed exclusive for them to purchase the option. I don't know what more to say about that. I mean, it's kind of some weird language, but
Well, I mean, it's still fairly straightforward. I mean, essentially you're selling them the ability to make it if they so choose at whatever point in the future they want to do it.
right, and it actually is something that you see a lot. People advertise themselves as optioned for film on Wattpad a lot, and you realize after a little while that it doesn't mean shit. It doesn't mean that their movie is coming to a theater near you anytime soon.
It
just means
sounds
that
a lot more important than it actually is.
exactly. It means that it is sitting on a network slush pile, probably right beside mine somewhere, and it's probably got fish taco juice all over it from, them eating their lunch nearby or whatever.
To be fair, as far as self promotion goes, and I really didn't think much of this until I was actually in the Army and they made us go to a class when I was getting ready to separate about how to translate your military skills into usable experience on your resume for civilians. It's not necessarily a bad thing to present yourself as being more impressive than you necessarily are. If you can use language that makes it sound better, fucking go for it. Why not?
Oh, well, that's definitely true, and you do see that. You do see that a lot on Wattpad, and it's not just it's people are their half resume, and some people on there actually probably have a great big ego as well.
Well, yeah, and I mean, of course, there's room for abuse for it, but it's if you're gonna have to put your stuff out there for people to take a look at, why not mention? Oh yeah, I've sold the option to publish or present my work as a series or movie or whatever. Like, yeah, look at me.
Oh yeah, it's definitely one of those buzzword. It's a
Yeah,
buzzword.
that's exactly what it is. It's a buzzword.
Well, and I think it is exciting. I mean, I wanted to bring it up because, well, one, I think that it is exciting and it is an accomplishment. I think that you're one of very few people I know who has ever had that happen. But also to manage expectations, because I know in the workshop we've had some, discussion come through. Maybe some people have had some pretty unreasonable expectations and something like that does happen. Yeah, it's an honor that that happened. And I think it's personally, I find it impressive. But does that mean that, like you said, next year you're going to be on a screen in Hollywood? Probably not.
Totes.
Oh no, I am all about tempering expectations, and I do. I've felt really fortunate. I've gotten quite a great little following on Wattpad and made some really great friends over there. And honestly, most of the way I do it is by promoting other people like I would want to be promoted. I have a list of my own suggestions. I try and give shout outs to people that I'm working with or that have just impressed me over the course of their writing. And it's funny because we have a lot of the same infrastructure as Wattpad does. A lot of the ways to get really well noticed on Wattpad is to be part of the community, and they have a great community over there. They're really good. They're really the best at patting people on the back and making you feel good and building up your confidence. They're not real great at the kind of constructive criticism that we do because it markets towards a much younger audience, and I feel like a lot of them are still really self-conscious and very afraid to step on toes because they don't want that to happen to them. And that's all fine and good, but eventually you grow out of that and you need to grow as a writer. So
Yeah,
you
you're
need
going to
that
have to
constructive
improve your craft
criticism.
at some point.
Right. And we do have a lot of the first thing, these contests. These contests are one of the major ways to network, to make your craft better, to get in direct competition with writers better than you or on your level. I cannot one of the first ways I got noticed on Wattpad was by taking part in a Halloween contest. And it was the first thing that really launched me onto people's radars of the people who are ambassadors for Wattpad and heavy hitters there that had thousands and tens of thousands of followers. So it was a big part of that, and this what we're doing right now with having these really hard hitting contests, these really competitive contests, is a huge part of getting to where Wattpad is.
Well, that's good to hear. I just thought we were doing something fun and a little educational, but
Nothing is fun here.
oh, sorry.
No, it is, but like it's just like I was saying, we have a lot of the same infrastructure as possible. We have our Discord network. They have chat rooms, they're not like instant messaging like ours are, but they are chat rooms for writers to discuss their methods or their ideas. And they have book clubs where people can trade reads with each other. So that's something that we're kind of missing here. You can do it, but it's not as well structured as being part of a book club. And in those book clubs is sometimes where you'll find something close to the constructive criticism that we offer, but not quite.
Okay, I want to take this time to go off on a little bit of a tangent because this has been bugging me since August of last year when I first joined Steemit. Why can't we message people on the platform?
Oh my
Oh, I
God.
hear you.
Holy
Seriously.
crap. I shouldn't have to load Discord to send a message to other people on Steemit.
There's not even a
Ooh.
mentions thing, right? Like when I tag, like for example, I tagged Geek in today's announcement to say like, oh, congratulations at Geek. I don't even think she gets a notification of that,
Actually,
right? Like
nowadays there is, if I recall correctly, because they implemented that recently. But
where?
it's an automated thing. It's not anything like you would have noticed or seen. But I have seen Steemit when I have it loaded on my PC. Like if I have it pulled up in my Chrome or whatever, it'll send up a notification to me that somebody's mentioned me.
What? It like pops up and disappears? I don't understand.
Yeah, it pops up and disappears.
Well, what
I
the
have
hell
the
good
same
is
thing.
that if you're offline? I don't
Yeah,
understand.
I've got the same thing on that eSteam app. It'll give you a notification. But if the thing's not loaded, it doesn't do a damn lick of good because you don't get the notification.
Yeah, structurally, Steam, it's got a way to go. Just saying.
Well, and funny enough, busy.org, which is just a different UI to access the Steam blockchain, does have direct messaging. Now, I'm not going to endorse or advocate or, what have you. It's just another option. You can use it if you want to. You don't have to use it. And, I'm not putting any pressure on anybody to use it. They do have some sort of direct messaging system, but that's not really the point. I want to have something on the Steemit UI where everybody comes to. Not everybody goes to Busy. Everybody comes to Steam through Steemit, through the UI, through steemit.com. So I think it is beyond time for us to have messaging. I mean, it doesn't have to necessarily be its own separate app or have separate app support like you have on Facebook, but at least have the ability to like send a message to somebody by their handle.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'm not really familiar with what the whole point. I mean, Steam, it's in beta. It's been in beta forever, as far as I know.
I mean, it's only a year.
Are
It's
people
really only a
supposed
year
to?
old. So I mean,
Yeah.
let's cut it some slack just a little bit.
Well, I don't know though. I mean, are there people who are developers of Steemit that are actively working to change that, or is it because it's open source? Are they just expecting like random people to pick up like busy.org and make it better that way? I don't really know.
It's not that it's open source because Steemit isn't open source. I mean, the blockchain is accessible in various
Damn it,
different
I thought I
ways.
got something right about computers. Oh,
The code is open source. So.
Yeah,
that's what I meant.
Yeah, the blockchain is open source. Anybody can access the blockchain, but I think that's the devs, as far as I can tell and as far as I'm aware, have other issues that they want to hammer out first, and a lot of them have to do with like the reward pool and how all of that functions, and streamlining, account creation, for example. Nobody really thinks about account creation, but that process needs to be streamlined, because right now it's still manual approval of every account that comes through, which can take some time.
And it's still not stopping people from getting like 200 accounts.
Yeah. So I mean, there's a number of different issues that the devs are handling aside from that. But yeah, that's something that I've wanted to see for a year, and I would like for it to be implemented sooner rather than later. But there again, the devs for Steemit do have other problems on their plate. It's not like they're just sitting around twiddling their thumbs, wondering, "Oh well, I suppose we could do something, but we're just gonna hang around here and wait till somebody says something."
No, and I think it's I have a lot of faith in what it can do going forward. I just really didn't know whether there was like some core group of Steemit developers or if it
Yes,
had
they
kind
work
of
for
been
Steemit
put out
Incorporated.
there okay.
Yep.
And you as a developer, you can actually submit stuff to GitHub and have it accepted, but there's it's a community thing again too, right? Where you have to kind of engage developers, let them know what you're doing, and then they would have to review it and accept it into the core. And I think they've left a lot of the UI pieces on the outside where people have come along and submitted changes and things like that they've accepted and incorporated.
Yeah, they have.
Oh, I see. Well, that was very educational. I had no idea.
And knowing is half the battle. G.I.
right.
Joe.
I'm learning. So many people are trying to get around the lack of direct messaging, especially the spammers. They'll send like 0.001 Steam.
Oh Jesus! Don't.
Yeah,
not that.
it's like no, let's not go down this road.
I had someone do that to me the other day. I was so pissed about that.
Yeah, and they're giving you money. I mean, even though it's like a penny or whatever, they're giving you money, but it's still it's like you're spamming me. I know you've given me money, but you're still spamming me.
I'll take it. I just ignore them.
Yeah, that's what I do.
Someday, if Steam is worth what Bitcoin is, you'll be really glad for all those 0.001s you got.
I'll be honest, I've used that method before when trying to contact, because we've had a push lately to try and get people that are voting for dead witnesses, witness nodes that aren't functional anymore, to try to get people to unvote them and vote for active witnesses, witnesses that are actually, here and running an operating node. And I've done that before on a couple of accounts, simply because the accounts in question don't post anything. They are not on Discord. They purely curate content, and I don't want to clutter up the comment feed necessarily with kind of an unrelated topic. So I've done that before, but that's, again, I don't spam like every single user on Steemit with messages for 0.001 SBD. Maybe I'm an awful person. I don't know. I'm probably an awful person.
You can send me 0.001 SBD. You don't even have to say anything. I'll take it.
I'll bet you'd like that.
I would.
Which is a...
Well, I guess this is the part of the show where I again bring up that we will be doing this conflict prompt contest, and it would be really nice if anybody has a little SBD to spare, even 0.001. I will take it and I will put it toward the prize pool for the winners of our writing contest going forward. You can send it to at JR Hughes, and make sure you put conflict prompt or contest, something like that, in the memo, so everything can be transparent and above board.
I'll also mention this on the page, the post for today's show. Once I get it posted, it'll have a mention as to specifically where to send it to, and I'll bring this up as well. So yeah, not a problem.
All right,
Sending.
Tyler, go ahead.
Sending.
Thank you very much.
Oh my goodness. What?
I can do voices. Should I do voices from here on out? Should I just
Maybe
introduce
not.
every show Should I just introduce every show in a different nationality that I can do?
I don't think that's a good idea.
Would that be considered offensive? Would that get me a permaban in certain circles?
You could do Romanian.
I mean, I could, but it wouldn't be nearly
You're
as funny.
tempting fate. You're tempting fate, Andre.
I suppose I am. I mean, I could do Romanian, but it's not nearly as funny as doing Indian or something else.
Well, funny wasn't really what we were going for.
I beg to differ. This is all about comedy, or at least I think so. But anyway,
Well,
Well, I'll take it.
I wanted to. Go ahead.
I was just gonna say, since Andre brought it up earlier about basically getting high on yourself, the work that I talked about earlier. If anybody wants to check it out, like I say, I can't bring it to Steam it for now. And honestly, unless they change the whole unable to edit thing and losing rights on your work, I probably won't. You guys will be relegated to my C-list stories. But you can go on Wattpad and check out Birthright. I'm actually up for one of their major year-round awards they call the Waddies over at Wattpad, and I'm actually really, really proud of it. If you can stomach horror, then you might enjoy that.
I certainly can, and I will probably give it a look-see whenever I get a
Oh,
chance.
it is really good. It is so good. It was the first thing I read that he wrote, and I was so angry because I knew he had just started writing so recently. It was just infuriating.
Aw, shucks.
Up
I have
yours.
got to write some more.
Whoa.
I have to. I wish I had more time.
Well, this was a different kind of show tonight, and it was definitely true coffee house chatter, but it was fun, and I enjoyed it. And we'll probably end up doing shows like this more. We may have a special guest on next week. Stay tuned for some details. We're in talks with someone about getting him on here, and I think that Steam It Folk will be really excited if we're able to do that. Stay tuned to the fiction workshop. We also have some contests going. There are several contests out in Steam It going right now for people who want to write and get involved. And by all means, drop into the fiction workshop and talk with us. We love to hear from you. And there's usually someone always there. And if they're not there immediately, somebody will drag in shortly. So anyway, we'd certainly love to hear from you.
Well, I just got confirmation that we will have a special guest next week, and it will be at Easy EZZY. Anybody?
We got Easy on here? Hell yeah!
Yes. He will be here with us next week. He wasn't able to make it this week, but next week is good for him. And anybody that reads fiction on Steam It will know exactly who I'm talking about.
Absolutely. Easy is quite possibly one of the best known, or certainly best read and most well known author on Steam It as of right now. I'd like to think it's between him and
prolific.
Yes,
prolific. He puts out a lot and he delivers. It's great, and he's just an all around great guy too. You know, my interactions with him have been very positive.
Mine too. So this is exciting. I'm really happy about that. You go, Jessica. You did good on that. Thank you.
Yeah, round of applause for Jessica for handling that. I'm super excited for next week's show.
I'm not even going to tell you what I had to do.
Oh, we all know.
It involved Steam It chat.
Oh yeah.
Were you a werewolf or a vampire?
I sparkled.
Yeah.
Let me rub your bitcoins.
Oh, baby.
Oh my god. If we keep this up, we might get optioned. You know, I'm pretty sure this is how 50 Shades came about.
Yes.
Still a better love story than Twilight.
Oh god.
And that's not saying much at all.
We may be insulting people. I don't know.
Sparkly vampires here that are offended say aye.
If you guys were worried about that, y'all would have never invited. talk.
This is true. This is 100% true.
All right, just anybody who's read Twilight, just admit it.
I haven't.
Damn it.
I really have not. I have avoided it like the plague. The same way I've avoided 50 Shades of Grey. Although
Sorry.
arguably Twilight is probably still better written than 50 Shades of Grey.
I read it. I did.
50 Shades or Twilight?
I read Twilight. I started 50 Shades and just couldn't finish it.
See? So, as it stands, according to a professional editor, Twilight better than 50 Shades of Grey.
Well, better or more acceptable?
Less action off of Twilight, though.
Depends on your definition of acceptable.
Twilight
Well, acceptable to the
didn't-
reader.
Twilight didn't make me want to feel like I needed to go take a shower every 5 minutes. So yeah, I could manage that one.
Wait, but at the end, doesn't like the werewolf guy like fall in love with like the newborn ripped out of the womb infant?
Yes, if I remember correctly, which is just
Wait, so
utterly
you
bizarre.
read it too, Andre?
No, but I'm aware of what's going on because my
Mhm.
ex-wife was a big fan of the series.
And now we know why she's an ex.
And knowing is half the battle.
That's all I
But
have to say about that.
I have this image of Rhonda as Singh, like scrubbing her hands like Lady Macbeth. Just her like her page turning finger from having read 50, like the one page of 50 Shades.
There's not enough hot water or soap on this earth to take off the
yeah,
stain
pretty
of that.
much. Pretty much, yeah. And it wasn't just the gratuitous and explicit sex scenes. I've read plenty of books that are, that way. It was just the way it was all presented. It was just, no.
Well, the writing is just terrible, though, too.
really
I mean,
is.
I
It
have
really
read
is.
excerpts just for fun, and it is hilariously bad.
Yeah.
It makes me despair of what we're doing in the fiction workshop sometimes because I think, like, really, that's the $1 billion book?
See, I don't think so. I think it gives me hope because even at my absolute worst, even at like the lowest of quality that I could produce, I could still produce something better than 50 Shades of Grey.
And it must be something to do with the word gray, because the other book that made me just want to take a shower and scour with steel wool was Gray Mountain by John Grisham. That book sent me into it had me doing backflips of agony. I couldn't finish it either. So, it's the only one star review I ever gave on Amazon was that book.
Oh, wow.
Isn't he
Savage.
basically like Patterson 2.0, like ghostwriters out of his ass and all that stuff?
Something has happened because his earlier books were not so bad. I've read some of his earlier books. I read The Firm and Pelican Brief, but this Gray Mountain read like a bad first draft. And it was not just that, it was just his whole treatment of Appalachia in general that just really we won't even go there. We're running out of time. But anyway, yeah, it's the gray. Any book with the word gray in it, I'm a little leery of it now.
Well, it's like we said before. Just because an author is famous doesn't necessarily mean that all of their work is good. And when you are famous, you can get away with putting out crap because you have the name to sell it.
Oh,
Bingo.
yeah.
Exactly. That's exactly right.
Well, it's coming up on time to start wrapping up the show. I mean, did you guys have anything else you wanted to say in closing? Did you want to mention your contest one last time, Jess? Come on.
I just want to be clear. All right. I just want to be clear that we are not starting submissions for the contest yet. We're going to announce the opening of submissions next week. But if you want to get a head start on Man vs. Self and bring it by the workshop on Discord, you can get a little bit of help from people who will not be judges. We keep that separate. But then we'll open the contest for submissions next Tuesday. And I would recommend don't plan to post anything until next Thursday, just so that you have time on payout once we announce the winners, okay? And if y'all have a little bit to send by, I saw that Darkside did. Thank you. We will be taking donations.
All right, sounds like a plan. Anything else anybody else wants to say in closing? Rhonda, I know you're full of fantastic ideas.
Well, I don't have a book or writing bit of information, but I did want to give a quick update. Last week, I talked about the puppy that someone had dropped in front of the house, and he was pretty sick. I don't know that I'm saying the name right, but we have someone here at MSP, Lexiconical.
Yep, Lexiconical.
Lexiconical figured out a way to help us do a little fundraising and get the initial vet visit out of the way. So this past Friday, Bailey went for his first vet visit and was treated for sarcoptic mange. I knew he had that, and he was given his first vaccines and put on some antibiotics to clear up his skin, and he is doing great. So thanks to Steam It and thanks to Minnow Support and the people here, with us on Discord, and we really have done a wonderful thing for this little guy. And our Vermont rescue partners did say they want to take him, so it looks like his life is mapped out well from here on.
That's fantastic. I am really, really happy to hear that.
If I can jump in with one last thing too, if anybody is interested, like I mentioned earlier, Wattpad. One of the nice things about it is you retain all your rights and you can pull your story at any given moment if you want to. So if you're just out there looking to maybe get a better audience, and you might want to dip your toes into Wattpad, come over there and find me, Ian R. Cooper. I can introduce you to some decent book clubs you might want to take part in. Introduce you to maybe some nice users that can help you really gain an audience over there if you're just looking for more people to read your stuff.
All right, awesome. Glad to hear it. All right, well, everybody, this has been it for episode 4 of the Fictioneers webcast. It's been an absolutely awesome show. I thank you guys, everybody who was here, for participating. I thank you, the audience, for participating in the chat room. And we will catch you guys next week, as always, from 10 to 12 UTC. So until next time, you guys have a wonderful day and keep writing, please. We would love to read what you have to put out.